Alrighty, everybody. Oh, if I can get this back to the screen. This is Dr. Jenkins. This is going to be our video to end out the chapter on thermoregulation. We really don't have that many more slides to cover, but there are some things that I want to make sure I get through. So if you can see the time there on the top left part of your screen, Friday at 10:50. What else would I rather be doing, folks, than sports nutrition? Excuse me for blowing my nose. Okay, so we ended off talking about how our body can try and balance heat and cold. Just like we want to maintain balance of fluid, we also need to maintain a certain level of core temperature. And as I'm sure you can understand, if our core temperature gets to be too high or too low, it can cause problems. Particularly for an athlete, we think about if the core gets too hot. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We are, of course, able to acclimatize. I think I mentioned this in lecture this past week. Over time, our body can get used to the heat to a certain degree. Now, here we go. When it comes to acclimatization, we're able to acclimatize to temperature. And when I say temperature, I mean hot environments. It turns out that we're really not able to acclimatize to cold so much, but we definitely can acclimatize to heat, and we can also acclimatize to humidity, and of course, altitude. That's why a lot of the Olympic training centers are in Colorado at altitude, because if you live there and train there, you're going to purposely lead to positive adaptations in your cardiovascular system. But we're going to focus on temperature. Okay. As usual, I give you a lot of information, and as usual, I try and point out some of the most important things. So I love this graphic. I try and keep you with the most up-to-date graphics, and you can see a link down below. Let me just give you some examples. Over time, we can better manage the heat. These are all examples of things that are happening over time that allow us to better handle the heat. So over time, your body adapts. I'm trying to get positioned here. Okay. I'm going to point out some examples. So as you get used to the heat, we increase sweat rate. So actually, once you're used to the heat, you sweat more. It's a little bit of it might seem counterintuitive. And I know sometimes if you're not in shape, or it's the first time you're training out in the heat that year, you feel like you're sweating a lot. And you are sweating a lot. You're just probably not used to sweating at that time. But what's happening in reality, physiologically, when you exercise in the heat over time, one of the adaptations is you sweat more. And that is a positive adaptation. If I sweat more, I'm better able to evaporate that sweat and keep my body temperature lower. There's a whole bunch of other things. That's the one that I want you to know right now. Something else that I want to point out, trying to see if it's listed here or I'll just write it in. I'm trying to give you easier things, right? So you should be able to list 2 adaptations in our body that allow us to acclimate to the heat. One of them is a higher sweat rate. Once we get used to the heat, we sweat more. Another one is earlier onset of sweating. Earlier onset of sweating. So not only once you get used to the heat do you sweat more, you also begin to sweat sooner. And both of those are good because it means that we can sweat more, release more heat, thermoregulate better. Now, there's a whole bunch of other ones that you don't need to know. I will point some out because I think they're interesting. The only two you need to know are in red. But this affects everything. Once you acclimatize to the heat, you keep your heart rate lower. You don't need to know this, but I'm just pointing out some extras. You can actually keep your heart rate lower, which means you can exercise for longer. It means also that we can increase our stroke volume. You talked about that in lab. So once we can better regulate our heat, your heart can pump out more blood. That's what stroke volume is, amount of pumped out per beat. And it can do so at a lower heart rate, which means we can pump out more blood, keep our heart rate lower while we're doing it so we can exercise for longer. I mean, it affects everything. It keeps our blood volume higher. We like that. Keeping our blood volume higher, we're more hydrated, gives us more fluid so we can sweat more. You can increase muscle force production. What? You will decrease your rating of perceived exertion. That was something we talked about in lab. You'll become more sensitive to thirst, so you'll probably drink more. You'll experience less GI distress. So there's so many things that once we exercise in the heat over time, that allows us to handle that heat better. You only have to know these two for now. Now, when we talk about acclimatization, as I said, we can really only do it to heat, not so much to cold. Let me add some additional information that I would like you to know. How soon can it begin? Usually within let me retract that. Let me say 2 to 3 days. Usually we can begin to see some acclimatization within 2 to 3 days. So if I was a football team or any team, and like right now, the time of year, right now I'm recording this, it's March. We're just coming out of winter very slowly, but it's still cold out. We are not used to the heat. What if all of a sudden I had a game or an event in Miami? I am simply not used to the heat. Wouldn't it make sense for me to get there earlier? Of course. The ideal would be to get there 7 to 10 days early at least. That's not always possible. But knowing this, how early would you really want to get there to let your body start to acclimatize to the heat? Usually we can begin to see some of these changes within the first 2 to 3 days. When do we achieve some real significant acclimatization? I'm going to say 10 to 14 days. You know, I'm hedging a little bit because it of course matters, or it differs between people. Within 10 to 14 days, that's when we really will start to see more significant. So we can start to have some acclimatization within 2 to 3 days of exercising and being in a hotter environment. But when do we really start to see those significant adaptations? Within 10 or 14 days. So you should know those roundabout, okay? All right. Let's talk about some situations. And by the way, I've added a couple slides, and I've uploaded this updated version onto your Brightspace page. Who can thermoregulate better, kids or adults? Dramatic pause. The answer is adults. Adults can thermoregulate better. It's not because kids are wimps. They just haven't developed the whole way. They don't have as developed of sweat glands. Their body is not as good at distributing blood flow to where it needs to go. They have less skin surface area. They're shorter. Their limbs are not as long. So they have less skin surface area with which to sweat from. So adults absolutely thermoregulate better. And I really want you to keep this in mind because we all know the coach of the Pee Wee football team, the father who's reliving his dreams. And he's like, oh, we're going to toughen these boys up. And it's hot and they've got the pads on. We're not going to do any water breaks. We're going to toughen them up. Well, you have to remember that they can't thermoregulate as well as you can. So you cannot necessarily use yourself as an adult as a guide. You might be okay in that certain temperature, but the kids are not as able to thermoregulate. So it's not treating them with kid gloves. It's acknowledging they can't thermoregulate as well. So they probably, meaning they do, they need more breaks, more hydration. Okay. Who can thermoregulate better, men or women? Another dramatic pause. It's pretty much equal. Back in the day, not very long ago, in my parents' generation, they thought, oh, women shouldn't exercise. It'll jostle their reproductive organs. Women shouldn't exercise. They're not strong enough. They can't handle it. Women shouldn't exercise. They can't thermoregulate. That's not true. Overall, men and women tend to thermoregulate about the same. Now, they do it a little bit differently. Men seem to sweat more, but they are comparatively more wasteful sweaters. So they sweat more once we do these studies, but they don't evaporate as much of that sweat. Women sweat less, but they're more efficient at how much of that sweat gets evaporated. Women are a little bit more reliant on fluid shifts. And I still think we have a lot to learn. So men and women do it a little bit differently, but by and large, their overall ability to thermoregulate is about the same. Now, as an aside, don't need to know this. My female students out there, those who identify as female, but the men should know this too. Did you know at a certain time in the month for a female, based on her menstrual cycle, her core temperature goes up? During the last half of the month, if you look at a women's menstrual cycle, they say it's on average 28 days. Women out there know that it can vary. Sometimes it's 25 days, sometimes it's 40 days, sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 20. But the last half of the month, it's called the luteal phase. The last half of the month, it's kind of hard to see, isn't it? You don't need to know this, but I want you to be able to see it. In women, because of the hormonal changes, in the last half of each month, the core temp goes up 0.5 degrees Celsius. That may not seem like a lot, but when we talk about, we said, remember, an increase of 4 degrees Celsius during exercise, we can start to see dysfunction. If we can start to see dysfunction in as soon as a 4-degree increase, a half a degree starts to be a lot more than you think. So women, at some points in their menstrual cycle, their core temperature is already a little bit higher to start, which means that it is a little bit harder for them to thermoregulate. They're going to get closer to that upper limit sooner. Who can thermoregulate better, skinny dude or fat dude? Skinny dude. Someone with more fat mass, it's harder to thermoregulate. Why is it harder to thermoregulate? Well, when they have more fat mass, that extra adipose or fat insulates them more. So that extra adipose is what keeps them warmer in the winter. But in the summer, it acts like they're wearing an extra winter coat. So that extra adipose fat is an insulator. So they're going to hold on to that heat a little bit more. Additionally, that added layer or added thickness of adipose means it's more distance for that sweat to have to travel. Remember, in order to sweat, we've got to send fluid to the surface of the skin. Then we have to evaporate it off of the skin. If I have a thicker adipose layer, it's a farther distance that fluid has to travel to get to the skin to be able to sweat. When we look at cases of heat exhaustion, severe heat exhaustion, possibly death, which of these types of athletes is more likely to experience heat exhaustion? Somebody with more body fat, almost every time. So this is the same information. Who's better able to thermoregulate, adults or kids? Adults. Make sure you review the reasons why. Who's able to better thermoregulate, men or women? It's about equal. They sometimes do it a little bit differently, but overall it's about equal. Who can thermoregulate better? Someone with more fat mass or someone with less fat mass? Someone with less fat mass can thermoregulate better. Let's talk about heat illness. Corey Stringer here, this was probably way before your time. I want to say it was 2001. I was about to graduate college. He was a pretty high-profile player for the Minnesota Vikings. In training camp, keeled over and died from heat stroke. There's now the Corey Stringer Institute. There's a big research center over, I think it's at UConn, where they do a lot of research on rehydration and fluid balance in his honor. Let's just review the basics. We basically have 3 levels. Heat cramps is just a minor dysfunction from overheating. As our core temperature begins to go up, we can experience some discomfort. This is not life-threatening, but it can be uncomfortable. So we would have cramping, bloating, a decrease in performance. The next significant level, it's always going to start off like heat cramps. Then it can progress to heat exhaustion, a more severe situation, vomiting. And then the worst case, which is life-threatening, it can lead to heat stroke. This is when we see an increase in core temperature that is actually life-threatening. Heat cramps is the minor discomfort. It is, however, a message to your body that you're beginning to overheat. It can lead to a more severe situation, heat exhaustion. In heat exhaustion, we're still sweating, but now we're going to maybe have a headache, maybe feel nauseous. I mentioned throwing up, maybe feel a little bit dizzy. The best way to prevent these folks is proper pre-hydration, small drinks often during, acclimatizing to new temperatures slowly, wearing the proper clothing. Also, think about increasing your exercise workload at a proper rate. Don't go from running 2 miles to running 10. Okay. The life-threatening one is heat stroke. If our core temperature begins to rise and rise and rise, and it continues to rise, the body will begin to shut down. Heat stroke is absolutely life-threatening. It is an emergency. Excuse me. What I want to point out with this, always, the person will stop sweating. Remember, previously, they'll still be sweating. So actually, sweating is a good sign. It's showing you that your body is still attempting to thermoregulate. That's good. Once we get to heat stroke or potential heat stroke, you no longer sweat because your body is beginning to shut down. There's simply not enough fluid. There's not enough energy to be able to try and thermoregulate. Your body is purposely bringing all that fluid back to your core. LOC is loss of consciousness. Okay. You only have to know what we're covering. In addition to dehydration, we could, of course, also have an electrolyte imbalance. We talked about these in a previous video. Electrolytes are charged particles that carry a current. We rely on these to help us be able to make a nerve impulse, to contract our muscles. We need to have the right ratio of electrolytes. Remember, we need more, I'm reviewing, we need more potassium, K, inside the cell. We need more sodium outside the cell. This is the proper ratio. Once we start to disrupt this, it affects everything. And typically, along with a fluid imbalance, along with dehydration, we may have some associated electrolyte imbalances. I would like you to know these two: hyponatremia, sorry about the pause there, and hyperkalemia. Look at the word. Hypo means less than. So hyponatremia is low blood sodium. Also, we can look at the word to help us. The symbol for sodium is Na, and it's in the word. Hypo, Na, hyponatremia, low blood sodium. The other one I'd like you to know is hyperkalemia, high blood potassium. Same thing, look at the word to help you. Hyper means too much. And the symbol for potassium is K. So of course we have a K in the word. Hyperkalemia, too much potassium. Hyponatremia, low blood sodium. These are our two worries. You don't need to know the exact amount. Just remember the definitions. Hyponatremia, low blood sodium. It can occur from sweating out too much or from diarrhea, for example, or it can also occur from excessive water drinking. We talked about water intoxication. If someone drinks too much water, it actually can also have the effect of diluting the sodium, thereby making your relative sodium concentration low because it's so diluted. We've added so much water but not salt, so it dilutes the sodium. I talked about this, you can see your potential risk. How salty of a sweater are you? I know that you all think I was crazy for showing you the salt stains, but this is an indication of how salty of a sweater you are. There's a lot of variability. Some people are saltier sweaters, some people are not. So understand that about yourself. So you know if you need to really make sure you bring in enough sodium or not. In fact, some endurance athletes will ingest salt tablets. When I did the Ironman, I didn't feel the need to use that. I was drinking in enough of the Accelerate and my Ritz peanut butter crackers. I was getting enough salt through those. I did have some of my friends doing the Ironman who did ingest salt tablets. My recommendation would be not to just go straight for the salt tablets because you could easily bring in too much. Try and get your enough salt through healthy food, and then sports drinks or the like, and then only go to a salt tablet if you know you're a salty sweater and if you know that you can't get enough through the other means. Okay. I'm going to end this video by talking about a case study. I mentioned this, and not that you all care about me too much, but I want to show you an actual example. And unfortunately, I have an example, and I actually still have the medical report. So now that we've talked about this stuff, we can better understand. So here's my actual medical report from the medical tent of the Vermont City Marathon, which is in Burlington. There I am. I think this was at mile 8, that picture. So what happened, if you don't know about the Vermont City Marathon, it takes place over in late May every year in Burlington, Vermont, north Vermont. This particular year, it's been many, many years, this particular year, it was unusually hot. So it was like 85 degrees. So think about this scenario. When would I have been training most for this marathon? I had done most of my training in the winter and spring, leading up to May. Here in this part of the country, of course, it was cold. So I'd done most of my training in the cold. And then all of a sudden I show up in May, not acclimated to the heat, and it was really hot. So I hydrated well. I hydrated even more than usual. The biggest problem was that I was not acclimated to the heat, and there was nothing I could do about it. It was unusually hot. This was a day when there were a lot of people struggling. So I ran, and over time, I was like, oh, it's really hot. And I don't know, about mile 20 of a marathon, 26.2, at about mile 20, I started to stop sweating. This is a problem. And I do this for a living, so I knew it was a problem. You can tell you stop sweating. And I started to worry. Now, folks, it's mile 20 of 26. Would you stop? I probably should have stopped, but I didn't. I wanted to finish, so I continued. 6 miles to go was still quite a distance. So I stopped sweating, and as I got closer to the finish line, I remember weaving. So as you get closer to the finish line, they'll have those plastic, what's the word? It's late and I can't think of the word. You have like plastic dividers on the side of the road. And I remember weaving, like not being able to run in a straight line anymore. So I was kind of weaving towards one of the barriers, weaving towards the other. I knew I was in trouble. But by this time, I think I was within a mile of the finish. So stubborn me, I continue. So clearly I was disoriented. I was having nervous system dysfunction. So I don't remember finishing. I passed out. So apparently I crossed the finish line because I got a finisher's medal, but I don't remember. So apparently I crossed the finish line and they ushered me quickly to the medical tent. And here is their report. So let's look at the report. What did they circle? I went back in with the darker marker because it's been many years and it got a little old. Look at what they circled. Fatigue, lightheaded, weakness. Look at this. Altered mental, this is not my handwriting, folks. You know that. Altered mental status. What? I told you. So let's look at the numbers. Okay? I had just run 26.2 miles. Look at my blood pressure. Let's just talk about this. A normal blood pressure is 120/80. During exercise, we expect that to go up. So it actually during exercise should be higher. Maybe something like 130/85. That's what it should be. Yet, what was my blood pressure? Low. My blood pressure should not have been low. Why was my blood pressure so low? Because I was dehydrated. So with less fluid in my body, there was less pressure. Think of your blood vessels like pipes. Anytime you have less fluid going through pipes, there's less pressure of the fluid against the pipe wall. So this is really alarming. I should not have a low blood pressure right after running for 4.5 hours. And this is what happened. Now, you're not gonna have to know all of these. I'm just talking through this example, okay? And then look at what happens. your body will try and compensate. Because I had such low blood pressure, there was not as much blood. I was dehydrated, not as much fluid. So without as much fluid, the heart couldn't pump out as much each beat. So how is the body going to compensate? It's going to pump out more often. And you're going to breathe at a faster rate. So this is a common thing we'll see in any type of distress with the body. If your blood pressure goes down, your pulse and respiratory rate go up to try and counteract that. 120 is quite high. Look at my temperature, 101.6. What's normal? 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit to 101. How many degrees increases that? 98, 99, 100, 101? Plus 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So I was definitely nearing damage. We haven't talked about this. If you take anatomy and physiology, you will. Your oxygen saturation refers to what percentage of hemoglobin on your red blood cells is bound by oxygen. This should be 97 to 100. 93 is pretty low for an athlete, so that's worrisome. Look at their notes. Pale. Remember I said when you stop sweating, you're going to get pale. Your blood has been taken away from the skin. When you're sweating, your blood should be redder, darker. So what did they do? They gave me fluids. PO means oral, per oral. So they gave me 4 cups of fluid. They gave me some Gatorade. They gave me Zofran. That is an anti-nausea med. I was throwing up. I remember throwing up. It was miserable. They gave me a fluid also by IV. In total, 1.5 liters. Now, again, you're not going to have to know these, but I'm just hoping now that we've talked about it, you can better understand some of these things. Let's look at the electrolytes. So they did the exact right thing. What did they do? They took my blood, they did a finger prick, and they measured my blood sodium, blood potassium right there. Let's look at the sodium. My sodium level was 138. 138. I'm going to go back for a minute. You don't have to know this number. You're in the danger zone below 135. So I wasn't necessarily hyponatremic, but I was close. You really should be 140 to 145. That's where you want to be. So I wasn't necessarily hyponatremic. If it drops below 135, we worry, but I was close. So that was like meh. On my way to being hyponatremic, but maybe not diagnosable. However, let's look at potassium. What was my initial potassium? 7.8. Let me go back and see. What is a normal potassium? Do I have it on here? Maybe I don't have it. I'll write it in for you. A normal potassium. Again, you don't have to know this. A normal blood potassium is 3 to 5. Normal blood potassium, 3 to 5. Normal is 3 to 5. Ah, look at me, 7.8. So I was absolutely dehydrated. I was hyperthermic. My core temperature was too high. And I was, what's the word for too much potassium? Hyperkalemia. That is alarmingly high. And you know what? They knew it, because what did they do? After I had the IV, they rechecked it. When they rechecked after the fluid by cup and the fluid by IV, it had gone down to 5. It was not good, folks. Not good. If it had happened sooner, I definitely wouldn't have finished. All right, so you don't need to know those details. I just wanted to walk through that with you. And again, it's kind of funny looking back. Altered mental status. Yes. All right, so that's the end of this chapter. As always, study hard. If you have any questions, let me know.